Today on Riffs, Spirits, and Gear, we talk about string gauges. One of the most regularly asked questions I get on all of my social media platforms is, what string gauge do I use for insert tuning here? Any tuning, every tuning, I have been asked what string gauge and what pack of strings should the player start with. So today we're gonna tackle string gauges. Now, for this example, I'm going to be referencing primarily Ernie ball strings for a few reasons. I'm an Ernie ball artist, A, but B, Ernie balls are available everywhere worldwide, and C, number 3, and most importantly, as we will find out shortly, individual strings are widely available. So you can create your own sets and your own custom gauges, and we will get to that once we get to the lower tunings and what I use for things like drop B and stuff like that. So we are going to go over a wide range of tunings, and we're going to account for the Fender scale, and we're going to account for the Gibson scale, the 24 3/4 and 25.5 inch Fender scale. I would also like to note that it doesn't matter what string brand or what string gauge you use, an improperly set up guitar will never ever play as well as a properly set up guitar. So always be sure, once you find a gauge of string and a tuning that you enjoy, be sure to set up your guitar properly or take it to a qualified technician to have it gone over, set up, neck adjusted, intonated correctly so that you can play and sound your best. Let's get cracking. So using my handy string guide that is also available as a download in the description of this video so you can follow along at home, E standard. Now for the Fender scale, the 25.5 inch, I generally like to start with a 10 through 46 gauge set. Now this is a standard set. This is generally what comes on a guitar that is set up for standard tuning. Now on a Gibson, a 10 through 46 is still fantastic. A Gibson will obviously feel a little looser because the scale length is just a little shorter, but that's what Gibsons are. They are a little more slinky feeling. See what I did there? If you want a little looser feel like you get with the Gibson Les Paul on your Fender Strat or 25.5 inch scale guitar, I would recommend a 9 through 42 set, depending on your playing style. If you like to do the bendies and the widdlies, definitely check out the 9 through 42. It's much lighter, but you can just bend all over the place and it feels good. For drop D in both scales, a 10 through 52 will generally feel right. It will maintain the slinkiness on the high strings so you can still bend, but it beefs up the lower wound strings just a little bit, and that 52 really feels good in a drop D. I mean, it was really made for a drop D. Even this set has been around way before drop D was even a thing, but it still feels really good on both the Fender and the Gibsons. So 1052 for drop D. For E flat standard, I definitely recommend the 10 through 52 once again for the Fender scale. Now for the Gibson scale, the E flat standard, an 11 through 48 feels most comfortable to my hands. Again, it's getting a little heavier, but the 48 is still much lighter than the 52, so you still get kind of that slinkiness and that looseness that you would expect from a Les Paul, and it's not too tight. So 10 to 52 for E flat standard and an 11 through 48 for a Gibson Les Paul or shorter scale guitar. Now for the drop C sharp, I would recommend the 11 through 48 set with a 52 single on the end. That way you can still chug nice and hard, but still maintain the feel that you would expect while still being in a standard tuning. So just to take up that slack a little bit from dropping that to the D, definitely think about adding a 52 on the bottom, and that is a 25.5 inch Fender scale. Now for the Gibson scale, I would recommend the 11 through 54 set. This will universally kind of feel a little bit more slinky, but again, it's compensating for that dropped low string and feels really good and gives you that right amount of rubber bandiness. I don't know if that's a technical term, but the wow when you are hitting that low E. Wow. Yeah. Now for D standard in the Fender scale, I highly recommend the 11 through 54 set. Now the 11 through 54 set is optimal for detuning and is a beefy slinky, but lots of companies make this set. It's kind of a light top, heavy bottom, just up a notch, or 2 notches really. It's just a heavier set universally across the board. This will feel really good for Fender scale instruments and even Paul Reed Smiths that are 25-inch scales that are in between the Gibson and Fender scales. For a Gibson scale, D standard, the 11 through 48 feels very, very nice. The beefy slinky, a lot of guys use that this pack for drop C. It's a little loose for me, but for a D standard pack, 11 through 48 is definitely the way to go for a Gibson scale. Now for the very popular C standard tuning, for the Fender scale, I would recommend the 12 through 56, not even slinky. These are very good for, they're kind of an in-between. They start to feel a little slinky, but not too much. They're still maintaining a pretty good tension. Now, if you wanna go really light and you wanna get a lot of bendy feel and still be in C standard, the 11 through 54 set is definitely a good starting point. You can fine tune some of the gauges in there with singles if you'd like. The 12 through 56 on the Gibson scale is really, really good for C standard as well. That 56 is really kind of needed for that short scale, even before you start to drop. And you can get away with dropping it, and we'll get to that in a second. But the 12 through 56, way to go with the Gibson Les Paul scale. Now for drop C, for my own personal guitars on the 25.5-inch scale, I actually like the 11 to 54 set with a 56 on top, or even sometimes a 60, depending on how I'm feeling and where my right hand is sitting at for the day. If I'm really warmed up and I'm really playing away, I will put a 60 on the guitar, but normally I will switch out the 54 in the 11 through 54 pack for a 56 from the Not Even Slinky pack. Now for drop C in the Gibson scale, I use the 12 through 56 Not Even Slinky set, and I also put the 60 on the bottom. Since it's shorter with the Gibson, the 60 really feels good for the drop C. That's what I've been using for a really, really long time, and that's kind of a good in-between with size versus tension for me personally. So now we're on to drop B, and drop B is something that I primarily use. I am in drop B probably 90% of the time. I use drop B with my Gibson Les Pauls and my long scale Balaguer Hyperions. And I use slightly different gauges, but surprisingly similar, but they are different for both of those guitars. Now this is where it's handy to have a company that has readily available single strings available. They can go into any store or order online or right off their website, because I have made my own gauge set just through many years of kind of working through what I prefer string by string. So for my drop B and my long scale, my 25.5-inch scale, I use an 11, I use a 15, 20, 36, 48, and 60 for drop B. This lets me feel enough tension on the higher strings while allowing just enough twang on that low string. It stays in tune and it stays tight. If I went any lighter than that 60, it would be too light and I would go out of tune when I chug. The 60 has just enough give to sound really, really good and have a really good attack. Now for the Gibson side, I actually use the high strings from the Not Even Slinky pack. I use a 12, 16, 24, 36, 48, and 60 for the Les Paul scale. Now, this beefs up the higher strings while maintaining the size of the lower strings. And believe it or not, that 60 works great on the Gibson Les Paul, although I'm thinking about bumping it up to like a 62 or a 64. I've gone as high as a 70, and that felt a little weird, and the guitar kind of had some problems with the 70. 70 is a huge string for something like a Gibson Les Paul. I know Lee Malia from Bring Me the Horizon uses an 80. That is insane, but I like the 60. And again, I like them a little flappy. I like them slinky feeling. And so a 12, 16, 24, 36, 48, and 60 is what I use for a drop B and a short scale guitar. Now let's talk about basses for a second. Basses are kind of an interesting subject because the strings are so big, you actually have quite a bit of leeway to go from one tuning to the other. As long as your bass is set up properly and you have some fresh strings, I usually have no problems dropping the same set, going from, you know, drop C to drop B to drop C sharp, all with the same gauge, all with the same strings, on the same bass, on the same day. You can definitely get away with that if your setup is good. So for E standard and drop D, I generally stick to the 50 through 105 regular slinky bass pack. Good tension, good attack, feels good. It's not too tight, but also not too loose. For E flat standard and drop C sharp, I still stick with the same set, 50 through 105. And if you're looking for a different tone, it might not hurt to have the same gauge on a different bass, but generally I use the same bass for standard, drop D, E flat standard, and drop C sharp. Now for D standard and drop C, I'm using a 55 through 110 set. This is a good tension. It's real healthy tension on this set. It's not overkill by any means. Your hand doesn't fatigue, I don't find anyway, but you still have enough tension to really dig in with a pick if you're playing with one on the bass, and you can still get a lot of attack using this set. Now for drop B, I do a super slinky bass 5 set, and I use the lower 4 strings. So I throw away the 40 and I use the 60, 75, 95, and 125 for drop B. Usually I will bounce between this and the regular slinky bass 5, and that goes up to 130 on the low end. 130 feels, oddly enough, it feels too heavy on my jazz bass, but feels just right on the P bass. I don't know how that works, because they're the same scale as far as I know, but every bass is different, and the 125 just feels good on the jazz bass, and that still gives you enough attack without the flop, without really fatiguing your hand going to the 130 in this particular case. That's all for string gauges. I hope you guys have learned something and know where to start if you were thinking about going to a lower tuning. Again, down in the description, you can download this PDF that I have made of kind of just a general guide to string gauges and bass string gauges as well. Again, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to leave them down below in the description. You have been wonderful. I have been Fluff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.